I think the assumption is that because I'm black, I'm supposed to obsess over racism. And by obsession, I mean that, the sort of idea that I'm supposed to always talk about it, I'm supposed to call it out, but I'm also supposed to go out of my way to look for it and use my platform to denounce it. And the answer is always going to be no. I'll never do that. And here's why. Growing up a leftist, that was what was done. It's almost like it's a trait passed on for generations in our culture, and it largely stems from the oppression that blacks have historically dealt with in this country. So it's supposed to put us on the defense. It seems like people simply want to cling to this idea that being black in America is incredibly difficult and I'm supposed to make you feel bad about it, or as if you owe me something. Now, I'm no longer a leftist, and if I wanted to sit here spending so much time worrying about racism, I would have never left the left. Now, learning about economics and the history of black folks in America was what led me to become a libertarian, realizing that the state has been the vehicle of black oppression since they arrived on the slave boats made this very easy. From slave codes to black codes, Jim Crow laws, and digging into some of the Supreme Court cases such as Plessy versus Ferguson, it's easy to see that the state has been the primary tool of the racists against black folks, and it still is to this day. But one of the things that really got me re-examining my approach to racism was studying the difference between particular civil rights activists and black leaders in this country. Often we are put under this impression that black folks that worked to liberate blacks were on the same page, and that's simply not true. They may have had the same end game, but the strategies weren't in alignment. In fact, we saw many of them bump heads because of all of this. Hell, some of them didn't even have the same end game. For example, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, W.E.B. Du Bois believed that blacks weren't going to really be making large strides until their top dogs were impressively educated. So you need these educational and economic elites to lead blacks, and then advancement will essentially trickle down to them. He called this the talented 10th. Now, Booker T. Washington, on the other hand, believed that blacks could liberate themselves by, the white man simply leaving them alone and getting out of the way, as blacks are taught skills and trades so they can control their own economic mobility. And a great quote of his is saying, "No race can prosper till it learns that there is as much dignity in tilling a field as in writing a poem." I, of course, take way more influence from Booker T. Washington, but it seems as if many blacks have went the W.E.B. Du Bois route. This is indicated in folks following these crooked civil rights leaders, which often play politics and buddy up with the mainstream left. And when you oppose these black elites, you are seen as a hater of blacks or somehow an unauthentic black person without much argument. They got to protect their talented 10th. But the most obvious and most relevant example that began to change my approach to racism comes from learning the differences between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was an integrationist. So while he was trying to liberate blacks, his idea was essentially using the government to reverse the efforts and force whites to accept the blacks. So you had the MLK types doing sit-ins and stuff like that. I think the perception is that Malcolm X was just a more militant Martin Luther King Jr., when he was actually much more than that. Malcolm is so misunderstood, so I'm going to play a few videos of him that really stuck with me over the years, because I want you guys to really learn about him as well as where I'm coming from. We'll recap each video. Now let's start with the first one.
If white immigrants can come to this country 50 years ago with nickels and dimes and no education, and come here and pool their little nickels and dimes and no education, and set up little stores, develop these stores into larger stores, develop this into an industry which creates job opportunities for whites. Since Lincoln was supposed to have freed the black man 100 years ago, and today the black man, according to the government economist, has spending power of $20 billion per year. We feel that with the black man spending $20 billion a year, not setting up any businesses, not creating any industry, not creating any job opportunities for his own kind, he's not in a moral position to point the finger today at the white man and tell the white man that he's discriminating against him for not giving him a job in factories that he himself set up. If the black man has $20 billion, and these so-called Negro leaders are such geniuses that they can integrate white restaurants and integrate white factories and force themselves into that which the white man has set up, they should use this same ingenuity to show the black people how to pool our wealth and set up something of our own. And then we won't have to force our way into his anymore. One more thing I would like to point out concerning what he said about 125th Street. We don't waste our time on 125th Street, but you can reach more people in the street who want to change than you can in the bourgeoisie society, the bourgeoisie church, and the bourgeoisie circles. Our program is directed toward the man in the street. So we spend our time in the street, and what we do with that man, instead of trying to change the white man in your mind and make you accept us, we change the mind of the black man and make him accept himself. And as soon as he accepts himself, he'll solve his own problem. He won't be trying to force himself into your factory and into your bedroom and into your kitchen.
Particularly at the end of this video is what I love, in which he's saying we don't focus on trying to make white folks accept the black man. We get the black man to accept himself, and then we don't worry about trying to force our way into the affairs of whites. Now, this is something being said when there was far more oppression of blacks, obviously in the 50s and 60s, but Malcolm understood that there is a lot of money being spent, and economically, blacks should be able to figure this out. It's 2018, where we have all these black millionaires all over the place, and there's way more than $1 billion being spent. So blacks are more free and have more money, but somehow folks take problem with me taking the position of Malcolm X. This does nothing but highlight how most people don't know Malcolm or black leaders, and the white leftists have been able to convince blacks that they are more oppressed now than they were during the civil rights era. Let's continue. On the subject of integration, Malcolm X had some interesting things to say.
As long as we sit around here trying to pray to the white man's God and go to the white man's church and into the white man's school, we'll be brainwashed by the white man's educational system, and we'll continue to look down upon ourselves, and we'll continue to be a beggar to him, because we'll continue to think that he's superior to us. Instead of the Negro leaders having the black man begging for a chance to dine in white restaurants, the Negro leader should be showing the black man how to do something to strengthen his own economy, to give himself an independent economy, or to provide job opportunities for himself. Not begging for a cup of coffee in a white man's restaurant. And what the Negro leader has done is gotten himself wrapped up in the method and has forgotten what the goal is. The goal is the dignity of the black man in America. He wants respect as a human being. He wants recognition as a human being. Now, if integration will get him that, all right. If segregation will get him that, all right. If separation will get him that, all right. But after he gets integration and he still doesn't have this dignity and this recognition as a human being, then his problem is still not solved. I don't think you can, having an opportunity to ride either on the front or the back or in the middle of someone else's bus doesn't dignify you. When you have your own bus, then you have dignity. When you have your own school, you have dignity. When you have your own country, you have dignity. When you have something of your own, you have dignity. But whenever you are begging for a chance to participate in that which belongs to someone else, or use that which belongs to someone else on an equal basis with the owner, that's not dignity, that's ignorance.
This is what he had to say about white liberals.
I think there are many whites who act friendly toward Negroes. A fox acts friendly toward the lamb. And usually the fox is the one who ends up with the lamb chop on his plate. The wolf doesn't act friendly, and therefore the wolf has more difficulty in getting the lamb chopped in his plate.
I'd like to point out, though, that...
And I say that because it is usually if you study the structure of the Negro community, economically, politically, civically, psychologically, and otherwise, it's controlled by the white liberal, who usually poses as the friend of the Negro, who actually differs from the white conservative in the same way that the fox differs from the wolf. Their appetite is the same. Their motives are the same. It's only their mannerisms and methods that differ.
Today, you could point to a large number of Negro leaders who have consistently betrayed Negroes in a whole host of areas.
They aren't really Negro leaders. These are puppets that have been put in front of the Negro community by white liberals. These are parrots that have been put in front of the Negro community by white liberals. You can't name me a Negro leader who has betrayed Negroes, who has not been endorsed, sanctioned, subsidized, and supported by the white liberals.
Before I summarize my actual position on this, I'd like to mention that Malcolm was also saying this post Nation of Islam. For example, one of his most iconic speeches is the Ballad of Bullet, in which he said, "I don't believe in any kind of integration. I'm not even worried about it because I know you're not going to get it anyway. You're not going to get it because you're afraid to die. You've got to be ready to die if you try to force yourself on the white man, because he'll get just as violent as those crackers in Mississippi right here in Cleveland." He continues, "The white man is more afraid of separation than he is of integration. Segregation means that he puts you away from him, but not far enough for you to be out of his jurisdiction. Separation means you're gone. And the white man will integrate faster than he'll let you separate. So we will work with you against the segregated school system because it's criminal, because it's absolutely destructive in every way imaginable to the minds of the children who have been exposed to that type of crippling education." By today's standards, Malcolm X would be called a coon by these current pro-black civil rights leaders. But let's talk about where I'm at with these views. And I agree much with Malcolm on much of what he says about integration. This is my most controversial position, as it seems to piss off people from all different angles. It pisses off the mainstream leftists because it deviates from their narrative of togetherness and the kumbaya stuff. It irritates the mainstream libertarians for the same reason it irritates the conservatives. I don't do this whole "I'm colorblind, we're all equal" stuff. It irritates the left libertarians for the same reason it irritates the white supremacists. It's an admission that I want to be away from them just as much as they want to be away from me. And it irritates the left libertarians because it puts a dent in the narrative that I somehow buddy up with the white supremacists. My idea of freedom is actual freedom, and I'm not an integrationist. Now, I'm not necessarily a separatist, but I'm especially not an integrationist, as I believe in the right to integrate or separate, and it needs to be voluntarily arrived and not forced. Now, this limits the conflict. Now, no matter how much people want to pretend that that isn't the case, people have preferences that are largely based on this sort of familiarity. And nearly every single human affair, I'm going to prefer a black person instead of a white person, and I'm not apologizing for that. Don't get it twisted, though, it does first start with merit. I don't believe in the existence of a state, yet alone using the institution that has historically oppressed blacks to force white folks to accept me because I'm black. I've said numerous times that that's for losers, and in a free society or not, I will never beg whites to accept me, and that's why I don't constantly cry about racism. There's this expectation that I'm supposed to gripe about it because I'm black, and you get these idiots that think they can hijack my platform, demanding that I also obsess over racism, demanding that I must call out and denounce every time a racist appears. No, and that's the final answer. And this is why you won't catch me marching. You won't catch me constantly protesting. And you certainly won't catch me buddying up with these civil rights leaders who claim that they want to liberate blacks, but the solutions are always centered around handing more power to the agents of the state, or handing them a new set of rules, begging them to use their power for good of the black man. It's a textbook version of Stockholm Syndrome that I'm not at all interested in. And economically, they tend to be leftist status, and this is why it is no secret that the elitist white Democrats use this narrative of helping minorities to package this sort of economic policy that is also destructive to them. So I'm all about black betterment and solidarity, and that's why I deviate from the messaging and the strategy of the modern leftists in the first place. I've written entire articles about the black destruction by way of the state in the past and today, and I don't have to keep explaining myself. But most importantly, I don't concern myself with the opinion of whites that hate me. Let's be for real and stop with the dramatizing. These type of white folks, the fascist supremacist types, are a small circle of whites that have been given a spotlight because people need a boogeyman. They need a dragon to slay. I called this out years ago when it was an obvious gaslight being orchestrated by the media. Nobody, for example, knew who Richard Spencer was, and the media media gave him a microphone. They gave him a spotlight. Still to this day, he can't get more than like 100 people to come watch him. And both Unite the Right rallies have had far more protesters than actual participants that support their cause. I get it. Many of you want to perpetuate this idea that being black is the hardest thing, as if we have to look over our shoulder and the white allies must speak for us, telling the other evil whites to stop it. I'm not giving these idiots any sort of power, and I'm certainly not allying myself with white leftists that want to treat me as if I'm nothing more than a victim. For generations, these whites have used the struggle of black folks to control them. The more they can paint you as a victim, the more they can control you, and the more they can legitimize government in the process. This is how Democrats have been able to facilitate the destruction of predominantly black communities. Essentially, every single majority black community or city or district is ran by Democrats from top to bottom. But they've been able to basically yell squirrel and blame it on the Republicans. This is so fascinating because these cities, for the most part, have been like this for multiple decades. So where all of these drug laws are enforced the most, the gripes of the police brutality and so forth have been historically ran by Democrats. They use your gripes to put them in office and then blame the other guys. And these civil rights leaders and black celebrities love these self-hating white folks that also use racism to get some brownie points. It seems that they use the ploy when their positions of power is threatened. So they speak up for the black folks so they are not assumed to be the bad kind of white folks. And they do this to get or maintain power. They are some of the most evil son of a guns on the planet. As Malcolm mentions, they pose as the friend and benefactor of blacks, just so they can essentially use them to battle against the other whites. Blacks are the political football in this political football game. So when you demand that I go out of my way constantly denouncing these groups, I won't. I've made it obvious that I have no desire to stand side by side with those that hate me. If I wanted to have racism controlling my life, I would still be a leftist. You can try to say that I'm affiliated with folks I'm not because I don't obsess. You can slander, libel, and it won't change anything. You want me to obsess over these white folks, and I'm simply not gonna do it. Let them live rent-free in your head. Whether you're white, black, or whatever, we have problems if you're using aggression on me. Until then, you're entitled to whatever opinion you have, no matter how stupid it is. Y'all fools act like white folks have monopoly on the truth. You're so focused on who likes someone's stuff or who might also like what someone said. I can't tell you how many times I've had someone say, well, somebody that also likes this guy that I think is a racist also likes your stuff. So what? I firmly stand by whatever I said, and I believe it to be truth. That's why I said it. The truth doesn't stop being the truth because someone you dislike refers to it. Last but certainly not least, I am nobody's pawn and I'm nobody's mouthpiece.